Hey guys, I am so excited to get started on our story of Joshua and the fall of Jericho. So, this is happening from Joshua 5:13 through 6:27. So, that's chapter 5, verse 13 through chapter 6, verse 27. After the two spies escaped down the wall of Jericho by the scarlet rope, they hid in the mountains for 3 days and then returned to Israel's camp and told Joshua everything that had happened. Certainly, the Lord has given us the land he has promised, for all the people are weak and full of fear because of us. Joshua called his officers and told them that the time to cross the Jordan River had come. Go through the camp and tell everyone to prepare food and be ready for the move. For within 3 days, we will cross the Jordan River. Joshua told them, can you imagine the excitement as the people heard the news? The great moment for which they had waited so long had come at last. They would actually be in the land of promise, the land of milk and honey. It sounded too good to be true. Eagerly, they prepared their food, folded their tents, packed their bedding, and loaded their carts. Early on the fourth morning, Joshua called the people together and said to them, come, listen to the words of the Lord your God. Today you will know that the living God is among you, that he will without fail drive out all the people who now live in the land that you will soon occupy. The Ark of the Covenant will lead you across the river Jordan. So now they're there. Can you imagine seeing this huge river, seeing it bubbling and flowing and trying to get across? The people came to the brink of the Jordan River as they gazed at that foaming river swollen out of its banks and rushing in front of them over a mile wide. A mile wide, that means that they really couldn't see the other side very well. They wondered, how does Joshua plan to take 2 million people across this river? Are we going to build bridges? Use boats? What? The order went through the camp that everyone was to watch the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant as a signal to start. When you see the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant, follow them. However, stay way behind. You have never been this way before. A thrill of expectation swept through the waiting people. We are going to cross the Jordan on dry land as our fathers passed through at the Red Sea, they excitedly said to one another. As the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant into the river ahead of the people, everyone was breathless and stood on tiptoe to get a good view, wondering what would happen as the priest's feet touched the water. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen? Will it split like the Red Sea did with Moses? And all the Egyptians, remember, they got swept up by the river. What do you think is going to happen? As soon as the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant set their feet on the Jordan River, the river stopped flowing, as though it was held back by a dam, and the water piled up as against an invisible wall. Somehow, somewhere, miraculously, the river had been dammed up and had quit flowing. In a very short time, the riverbed was empty of water. At Joshua's orders, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant continued walking on dry ground until they stood in the middle of the Jordan River. Then the people began to cross by thousands and tens of thousands, whole families with all their children, animals, and possessions, driving their carts and their cattle as fast as they could go. It was an amazing sight. The people of Jericho probably watched this amazing sight from on top of the walls of their city, and they were struck dumb with fear. They had never seen anything like this before, nor had anyone else ever. Hour after hour, the Israelites continued to cross the Jordan River until the last person was safe on the other side. Then Joshua sent word to the priest in the middle of the riverbed. Come up out of the Jordan River. The priests came carrying the Ark of the Covenant and rejoicing. What do you think happens next? Hardly had they reached the bank on the other side when their dull roar in the distance they heard, the backed up waters came flooding over the place where the people of Israel had just walked across, and the waters of the Jordan River soon overflowed the banks of the river as before. That's pretty cool that God has done that twice, and they've seen that happen. The memorial stones. So to make sure that the people would never forget this marvelous miracle that they had just witnessed, God had told Joshua to have 12 men, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, to carry a huge rock out of the middle of the Jordan riverbed and pile all the stones in a heap on the riverbank as a memorial of the great miracle that they had witnessed that day. As the entire nation of Israel crossed the Jordan River and made their first camp, they built a monument of stones. Joshua explained the purpose of the stones. In the future, when your children ask you what this pile of stones mean, you're to tell them that this is a reminder of the amazing miracle that the nation of Israel crossed the Jordan River on dry ground, and that these stones came out of the middle of the dry bed of the Jordan River. Tell them how the Lord our God dried up the river right before our eyes and then kept it dry until we were all across. It is similar to the same thing that the Lord did 40 years ago when he dried up the Red Sea. He did this so that all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord is the mighty God and that all of you will worship him forever. This memorial of stones was set up at their first camp in Gilgal. And during the conquest of Canaan, Gilgal became their headquarters. Seeing the memorial stones, the people would remember what God had already done for them and what he had promised to do for them in the future. Surely the Lord, who had power to stop the Jordan River and bring his people safely across, also had the power to drive out the Canaanites and other heathen nations that inhabited the land. Israel was now face to face with all those heathen nations. There was no turning back. They had left the wilderness life forever. They were actually within their promised inheritance. And the next thing to do was to follow God in taking possession of the land. The nations of Canaan were truly paralyzed with fear when they heard the Lord had dried up the Jordan River. What could they do against such a powerful God as this? At the thought of their helplessness, they lost all courage. As soon as the Israel's camp in Gilgal was in order, they kept the Passover for the first time in their new land. This Passover feast reminded them of their deliverance from Egypt over 40 years before. The next day, after Israel crossed the Jordan River, they ate from the gardens and grain fields of Canaan. And the following day, no manna fell, and it was never seen again. For 40 years, God had nourished his people with bread from heaven. But from then on, they were to live on the food of the land, flowing with milk and honey, rich in fruit, vegetables, grain, and other good food. They did not need manna anymore. This was just another sign that a new life had begun for them. How wonderful was God's care for his people that manna did not fail until there was other food for them. Such is his care for us too. I can't wait to continue our story tomorrow, where we're going to talk about Joshua walking to the outside of Jericho and what happens at Jericho. Have a great night, you guys. Thanks for listening.